two of you could,
Sure.
or the three of us.
All right.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
So, Michael, tell us a few words about this book.
Sure.
I hope you have something prepared.
I actually do.
Okay, good.
Well, I'm extremely pleased that the AAP and the PSP has awarded its R.R. Hawkins Award to the race between education and technology, because I believe that this book exemplifies the scientific and educational values that animated Mr. Hawkins' life and work. Since I'm not really a public speaker, I asked my boss what I should say here, and he told me to start with a few good jokes. The problem is that this book is no laughing matter. It deals with a problem that is vital to American democracy, and that is the growing inequality between rich and poor in our country. It does this by combining ingenious and exhaustive empirical work and data analysis with a simple economic framework to shed light on why after more than 100 years of producing a sufficient number of educated citizens to become the managers, inventors, entrepreneurs, and workers required to maintain and improve a modern technological society, the production slowed a great deal starting in the 1970s. The title of the book, The Race Between Education and Technology, exemplifies its argument, which is embedded in a very simple supply-demand framework. You have a race between the rate of supply of new educated citizens and the rate of technological advance. The key feature of technological advance is that it often has what economists call a skill bias. That it creates a relative demand for skilled workers over that of unskilled workers. If the technology requires more skilled workers, their wages are bid up as opposed to those of unskilled workers. However, if the supply of educated citizens keeps up with or exceeds the demand for them, then the wages of everyone will rise and converge to some extent. In the mid-19th centuries, the authors have identified certain characteristics of the U.S. educational system, a set of virtues that furthered the education of all citizens at the primary level, with the tragic exception of African Americans, both slave and free. These virtues were that public education was publicly funded, it was open, it was forgiving in the sense that if a student dropped out, he could always return. It was pretty much gender neutral, it was secular, and it was decentralized. That is, publicly provided by a multitude of competing school districts at the local level. And at the beginning of the 20th century, these virtues were extended to secondary school education, and by the 1940s, college education became a middle-class entitlement. The United States also developed the finest university system in the world, also a decentralized system. But sometime in the 1970s, educational attainment, the authors found, in the U.S. began to falter. They showed that secondary school graduation rates reached a plateau, college graduation rates slid backwards, educational attainment by successive generations stopped its continuous increase after more than 100 years. After the mid-1980s, educational attainment did pick up somewhat, largely driven by a surge in college going, especially by young women. But this has not been enough to brighten the overall picture. What this book shows is that the slowdown in the growth of educational attainment is the single most important factor increasing educational wage differentials since 1980, and is a major contributor to the increase in family income inequality. Let me put that slightly differently. What is causing inequality to increase is not that the rate of technological advance is increasing, it's actually been pretty steady over the 20th century, but that the rate of the supply of new educated workers is decreasing. Now, two factors appear to be holding back the educational attainment of many young people. The first is a lack of college readiness of youth who drop out of high school, and of the substantial numbers who, even though they obtain a high school diploma, remain academically unprepared for college. The second is a lack of financial resources for many who are ready for college. Now, one explanation of the lack of preparedness is lack of resources for K-12 schooling. According to this view, the growth of resources in many states has not kept pace with the increased disadvantages of many students and the fact that women have many more career opportunities than they used to. Studies show that smaller class size, higher teacher salaries, and summer learning opportunities improve student outcomes. But critics of this hypothesis counter that increased average per pupil spending and reduced average class size in recent decades have neither increased test scores nor enhanced educational attainment. Perhaps the main source of the slow growth in the U.S. educational attainment since 1970 is the greater share of American children living in poor families and in single-parent households. It may just come down to the fact that these children are not being read to on a regular basis. Let me end by saying what I think the implications of this book are for scholarship and for book publishing. I think there are basically two. One is the search for truth. This book, a lot of critics of social science say that it's mushy and that it really can't prove its hypotheses. Well, this book combines both a simple economic theory and a vast amount of careful empirical work. And it actually is able to show that the hypothesis I just mentioned, the decline of new educated workers, is a much more important factor than, say, globalization or the decline of institutions such as union. Although they do play a role, the education factor is most important. The other thing I want to say pertains to book publishing. This book is not a bundle of information or bits. It can't be sliced and diced and computerized. Sure, maybe a chapter or certain charts can be taken, but it represents a sustained and connected argument. And I think that augurs well for books. Thank you.